What happens when one of television's most outspoken hosts decides to ambush a beloved Hollywood legend on live television, only to have it backfire spectacularly? Today we're diving into the explosive confrontation that left Joy Behar scrambling to regain control of her own show, while Johnny Depp delivered some of the most devastating responses ever captured on daytime TV. If you want to see how a seasoned actor can completely dismantle a talk show host's credibility in real time, you need to stick around for this entire breakdown. Make sure to subscribe and drop a comment letting me know what you think about how this all went down. The View had been struggling with ratings for months, and the producers were desperate for a viral moment that would get people talking. When Johnny Depp's publicist reached out about a potential appearance to discuss his latest film project, Joy Behar saw her opportunity. She had been vocal about her opinions regarding Depp's personal controversies in the past, and she was convinced that a confrontational interview would be exactly what the show needed to generate buzz. What the producers didn't realize was that Behar had gone completely off script. The planned interview was supposed to focus on Depp's return to filmmaking and his creative process. But Behar had other plans. She had spent the previous night preparing what she believed would be a series of gotcha questions that would catch Depp off guard and create the kind of dramatic television moment that would trend on social media for weeks. As Depp walked onto the set that morning, the audience erupted in applause. He looked relaxed and genuinely pleased to be there, waving to fans and taking a moment to acknowledge the warm reception. His charm was immediately apparent, and even some of the crew members who had been skeptical about his appearance were won over by his gracious demeanor. Behar, however, was practically vibrating with anticipation. She had that look in her eyes that longtime viewers of The View would recognize. The same expression she got whenever she was about to launch into one of her infamous rants. The other co-hosts seemed uncomfortable, exchanging glances that suggested they might not have been fully briefed on what Behar was planning. As Depp settled into his chair, Behar wasted no time with pleasantries. The moment the cameras rolled, she leaned forward with what can only be described as predatory intensity and said, "Johnny, let's be honest here. You've had quite the fall from grace, haven't you? I mean, from beloved pirate to Hollywood pariah? That's quite a journey." The audience audibly gasped. This was not the introduction anyone had expected, and Depp's publicist immediately looked toward the producers with alarm. But Depp himself remained completely calm, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth as if he had anticipated exactly this kind of ambush. "Well, Joy," Depp replied, his voice measured and controlled, "I think that's an interesting way to welcome a guest to your show. I was under the impression we were here to discuss filmmaking, but it seems you have a different agenda entirely." Behar pressed on, seemingly encouraged by what she interpreted as Depp's defensive response. "Come on. You can't seriously expect us to just ignore the elephant in the room. Your reputation is in tatters, your career is basically over, and yet here you are trying to make some kind of comeback. Don't you think the public deserves to hear you take some actual responsibility?" The tension in the studio was palpable. Camera operators zoomed in on Depp's face, expecting to capture a moment of discomfort or anger. But instead, they found something far more compelling. Depp's expression shifted from polite interest to what could only be described as amused disappointment. "Joy, I have to ask," Depp said, his voice taking on the kind of theatrical quality that had made him famous. "Did someone hurt you this morning? Because the level of hostility you're displaying towards someone you've invited onto your show suggests you're working through some personal issues that have nothing to do with me." The audience began to murmur, and a few people could be heard chuckling nervously. Behar's face flushed red, but she was far from backing down. If anything, Depp's response seemed to fuel her determination to prove whatever point she was trying to make. Don't try to turn this around on me, she snapped. I'm asking legitimate questions that anyone in journalism would ask. You've been involved in some very public legal battles, and people want to know where you stand. Depp leaned back in his chair, completely relaxed, and said, Joy, I've been in this business for over 3 decades. I've sat through thousands of interviews with everyone from respected journalists to tabloid reporters, and I can tell you with complete certainty that what you're doing right now has absolutely nothing to do with journalism. This feels personal, and I'm curious about why that is. The other co-hosts were now visibly squirming in their seats. One of them attempted to interject with a comment about Depp's upcoming film, but Behar cut her off with a wave of her hand, clearly determined to continue her line of questioning. Personal? Behar laughed, but it came out forced and unnatural. Johnny, everything about your life has been personal and public for years. You can't have it both ways. You can't court the media when it benefits you and then act like a victim when people ask tough questions. Depp's smile widened, and for a moment, he looked almost impressed by Behar's persistence. You know what, Joy? You're absolutely right about one thing. I have been in the public eye for a very long time, and I've learned a few things about people along the way. For instance, I've learned that when someone is this determined to make another person look bad, it usually says more about them than it does about their target. The studio audience was now completely silent, hanging on every word of this unexpected verbal sparring match. Behar seemed to realize that she was losing control of the narrative, but instead of backing down, she decided to escalate even further. Are you seriously going to sit there and lecture me about character? She demanded. You're the one who... But before she could finish her sentence, Depp held up his hand in a gesture that was both polite and commanding. Joy, I'm going to stop you right there, because I think we've reached the point where you need to make a decision about what kind of show you want to run here. The silence that followed Depp's statement was deafening. Even the camera crew seemed frozen, unsure whether they were witnessing great television or a complete disaster. Behar's mouth opened and closed like she was trying to find words that simply wouldn't come, and for the first time since the interview began, she looked genuinely uncertain about how to proceed. Depp continued, his voice remaining calm, but gaining an edge that suggested he was done playing defense. You see, Joy, you invited me here under the pretense of discussing my work, but what you really wanted was to create a moment. You wanted to be the person who finally got Johnny Depp to break down on television. The problem is, you've made a fundamental miscalculation about who you're dealing with. Behar finally found her voice, though it came out sharper and more defensive than before. I don't know what you think you're implying, but I'm a professional journalist with decades of experience interviewing celebrities. I don't need to create moments. They happen naturally when people are honest. Journalist? Depp repeated, and his tone carried just enough surprise to make it clear he found the description amusing. Joy, with all due respect, you host a daytime talk show where you and your co-hosts discuss pop culture and politics. That's entertainment, not journalism. And the fact that you're trying to hide behind the shield of journalism to justify what is clearly a personal attack tells me everything I need to know about your character. The audience was now completely captivated. What had started as an uncomfortable ambush was turning into something far more compelling. A masterclass in how to handle hostile questioning without losing composure. Several people in the audience could be seen leaning forward in their seats, completely absorbed in the verbal chess match playing out before them. One of the other co-hosts tried again to redirect the conversation, saying, Johnny, maybe we could talk about your new film project and what drew you to that particular role. But Behar wasn't about to let anyone derail what she still believed could be her moment of triumph. "No. I think we need to finish this conversation," she said firmly. "Johnny seems to think he can come on this show and turn the tables by attacking me personally. But I'm not going to be intimidated." Depp laughed. And it was a genuine sound of amusement rather than mockery. "Joy, I haven't attacked you personally. I've simply pointed out that your approach to this interview is unprofessional and appears to be motivated by something other than legitimate curiosity about my work. If you want to call that an attack, then I think you're proving my point about this being personal for you." Behar's face was now bright red, and her voice rose as she said, "You want to talk about unprofessional? Let's talk about someone who thinks they can waltz back into Hollywood after everything that's happened, and expect people to just forget about their behavior." "There it is," Depp said softly, but his words carried clearly through the studio. "Now we're getting to the real issue, aren't we? You're not upset about anything I've done professionally. You're upset because you've decided that I should be punished, and the fact that I'm still working, still creating, still being invited onto shows like yours, that bothers you on a personal level." The accuracy of his observation seemed to hit Behar like a physical blow. She sat back in her chair, clearly struggling to formulate a response that wouldn't confirm what Depp had just suggested. The other co-hosts were now looking everywhere except at their colleague, obviously uncomfortable with how far this had gone. "I think," Depp continued, "what's really happening here is that you've appointed yourself as some kind of moral arbiter for the entertainment industry. You've decided who deserves redemption and who doesn't. And you're frustrated that the rest of the world doesn't necessarily agree with your assessment." Behar finally exploded. "Don't you dare try to psychoanalyze me. I have every right to ask tough questions. And if you can't handle that, then maybe you shouldn't be doing interviews." "Joy," Depp said, his voice dropping to almost a whisper, forcing everyone in the studio to strain to hear him. "I've handled tougher questions from actual journalists who knew how to ask them without making it personal. What you're doing isn't tough questioning. It's just mean-spirited. And the fact that you can't see the difference is deeply concerning." The camera caught Behar's reaction perfectly. Her face cycling through anger, embarrassment, and something that looked almost like panic. She had clearly expected Depp to either get angry and storm off, or to become defensive and flustered. Instead, he was systematically dismantling her entire approach while remaining completely composed. "You know what I think happened here?" Depp asked, addressing not just Behar but the entire studio audience. "I think someone told you that being aggressive and confrontational would make for good television, and you confused aggression with intelligence. You thought that if you came at me hard enough, I'd crumble, and you'd look like some kind of fearless truth-teller. But the truth is, there's nothing fearless about ambushing a guest on your own show. That's actually quite cowardly." 1. The audience was now completely silent, hanging on every word. Even the other co-hosts seemed transfixed by what was unfolding. Behar looked around desperately, as if searching for support from her colleagues, but found none. "I want to ask you something, Joy," Depp continued. "When you were preparing for this interview, did it occur to you that I might actually be a human being with feelings? Or did you just see an opportunity to score points by taking shots at someone you perceive as vulnerable?" Behar's mouth opened, but no sound came out. For someone who made her living talking, she seemed to have completely run out of words. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity, and it was clear that she had lost complete control of not just the interview, but the entire situation. Finally, Depp leaned forward and said, "Joy, I came here today to talk about my work, to connect with your audience, and to have what I hoped would be an intelligent conversation. Instead, I've been subjected to what feels like a personal vendetta disguised as journalism. I think your viewers deserve better than that. And frankly, so do you. The weight of Depp's words hung in the air like a challenge that everyone in the studio understood but no one knew how to address. Behar sat frozen. Her usual quick wit completely abandoned her, and the longer the silence stretched, the more obvious it became that she was in way over her head. The camera operators were getting shots that would become legendary, capturing every micro-expression of her growing panic. One of the producers could be seen frantically gesturing from behind the cameras, clearly trying to signal for a commercial break, but Behar either didn't see the signals or was too proud to take the lifeline being offered. Instead, she made what would prove to be the biggest mistake of her career by deciding to double down on her failed strategy. "You know what, Johnny?" she said, her voice shaking with barely controlled rage. "You can sit there and act like the victim all you want, but everyone watching this knows exactly what kind of person you really are. You can't charm your way out of the truth forever." The moment those words left her mouth, something shifted in Depp's demeanor. The patient, almost amused tolerance he had maintained throughout the interview vanished, replaced by something far more dangerous. When he spoke, his voice carried a cold precision that made everyone in the studio sit up and take notice. "Joy, I want you to listen very carefully to what I'm about to say, because this is important. You just accused me of being a bad person on live television without offering a single specific example of wrongdoing. That's not journalism, that's not entertainment, that's defamation. And the fact that you think you can do that without consequences tells me that you've been surrounded by yes people for so long that you've forgotten how the real world works." Behar's face went pale as the implications of what she had just done began to sink in. She looked toward the producers again, this time with obvious desperation. But Depp wasn't finished. "But here's what's really tragic about this whole situation," he continued. "You had an opportunity today to have a real conversation with someone who has spent decades in this business. Someone who could have shared insights about creativity, about resilience, about the craft of acting. Instead, you chose to turn it into a cheap shot fest because you thought that would make you look tough. All you've really accomplished is showing your audience that you're willing to sacrifice basic human decency for what you hope will be a viral moment." The audience was completely riveted now, and several people could be seen nodding in agreement with Depp's words. Behar looked around the studio desperately, as if searching for someone to rescue her from the hole she had dug for herself. But even her co-hosts were avoiding eye contact. "I want to address your audience directly for a moment," Depp said, turning to face the cameras. "You deserve hosts who treat their guests with respect, who ask thoughtful questions, and who are genuinely interested in having conversations, rather than creating conflict for its own sake. What you've witnessed here today is what happens when someone mistakes cruelty for courage." Behar finally found her voice again, but it came out as a desperate shriek. "How dare you lecture my audience? This is my show, and I'll run it however I see fit." "Actually, Joy," Depp replied with devastating calmness, "I think you'll find that this is the network's show, and the sponsor's show, and ultimately, the viewer's show. You're just temporarily in charge of it, and based on what I've seen today, I suspect that arrangement might not last much longer." The look of horror that crossed Behar's face suggested that Depp's words had hit far too close to home. The rumors about declining ratings and advertiser concerns were apparently well-founded, and his casual mention of her potentially tenuous position clearly struck a nerve. "I think," Depp continued, "what we have here is someone who has become so comfortable with being mean that they've forgotten how to be anything else. You've built your career on being the person who says what others won't, but somewhere along the way, you confused being honest with being cruel. And now, when faced with someone who won't be intimidated by your tactics, you don't know what to do. Behar stood up abruptly, her chair rolling backward with such force that it nearly knocked over one of the stage lights. She shouted, "I don't have to sit here and listen to this." "Actually," Depp said, remaining perfectly seated and composed, "you invited me here. So yes, you do have to sit here and listen to this. Unless, of course, you want to walk off your own show, which I suppose would be one way to handle the situation." The challenge in his voice was unmistakable, and Behar seemed to realize that she was trapped. If she walked away, she would look weak and unprofessional. If she stayed, she would have to continue enduring what was essentially a public dismantling of her credibility. Either choice would be humiliating, but walking away would be admitting defeat. She sat back down heavily, but her attempt to regain control was pathetic to watch. "We're going to take a commercial break," she announced, her voice barely steady. "No," Depp said firmly. "We're going to finish this conversation first." The power dynamic had shifted so completely that even Behar's own crew seemed to be taking orders from Depp now. Nobody moved to cut to commercial, and the cameras kept rolling as he delivered what would become the most quoted lines of his entire career. "Joy, I want you to remember this moment," he said, his voice carrying the kind of theatrical weight that had made him one of the most respected actors of his generation. "I want you to remember what it feels like to realize that your cruelty has consequences. Because someday, when you're wondering why people stopped taking you seriously, why your show got canceled, why your friends stopped returning your calls, you'll think back to today and understand that it all started with your decision to be needlessly cruel to someone who came here in good faith." Behar finally cracked completely. Tears started streaming down her face as she shouted, "Cut the cameras! Cut them now! This interview is over." But the damage was already done. As the studio erupted in chaos, with producers running around, trying to figure out how to salvage the situation, Depp sat calmly in his chair, looking like a man who had just taught a masterclass in how to handle a bully. The footage would be online within hours, and by the end of the day, Joy Behar's name would be trending worldwide for all the wrong reasons. The irony was perfect. In trying to destroy Johnny Depp's reputation, Joy Behar had instead destroyed her own credibility so thoroughly that she would never fully recover from it. And all because she had forgotten the most basic rule of television: if you're going to try to take down a master performer, you better make sure you're prepared for them to perform right back. What did you think about how Johnny Depp completely dismantled Joy Behar's attempt to ambush him? Did she get what she deserved? Or did he go too far in his response? Drop a comment below and let me know your thoughts. And don't forget to subscribe for more breakdowns of the most explosive moments in entertainment history.